Hi everyone. I received a lot of feedback that some guidance on setting up the cash flow would be really helpful in getting started with this workbook. In this first video, I'm going to focus on two main things: how to decide on an option for tracking your cash flow and setting up your budget categories. We'll also cover really quickly creating an annual budget. So first I want to explain my philosophy on tracking cash flow. As you know, this is not a budget spreadsheet. Its focus is on analyzing your cash flow solely for the purpose of making good financial decisions. This includes things like tracking your savings rate, estimating your taxes, of course, and determining how much you need for retirement. So if you already have something that works really well for you, you can probably just integrate it into this workbook. Here's a few options for tracking your cash flow. So first of all is just manual entry. I don't recommend this for most people, but there are a few people that don't like to link their bank accounts or prefer to do things manually. I also have had people reach out and say they want to do it this way because they only want to track tax-specific expenses and categories, and that's all fine. You can see here I have an example of all of this being tracked manually. It's pretty basic. The second option is to use Tiller. Tiller is a subscription service that allows you to just pull in all of your bank transactions and actually your balances as well. And it works amazing. You can see, like for example, payroll, I've already split these out. So these came in one net number and then I added this detail. So it's pretty basic. It has some additional information that it pulls in that you can see there. The great thing with Tiller is that if you're not budget focused, if you're using my workbooks, you can simply track expenses and not have to focus on creating a budget every month. So that's a great feature. Another great thing about Tiller is they do offer some budget templates, even business templates, lots of different things. So you can check them out and see what they offer. But you can use them directly in my workbook. You don't have to use their templates. YNAB is what I personally use for budgeting. I love that it's really proactive rather than reactive, which is what most budgets are like. And I like that I can keep everything super organized. I can see upcoming transactions and see what my balance of my bank accounts are going to be, and that I can allocate money I have to several different buckets without having separate savings accounts. At the end of the month, I run a YNAB report that shows my income and expenses for the month. I just export it to a CSV and copy and paste it into this workbook. So you can see an example. I just have the basic information. I enter the date, I have the category from YNAB and the amount. That's the total for the month, and that's all I have to worry about. Mint is another option. Of course, Mint is the most widely used budgeting software. It is free, of course. I'm personally not a fan of Mint because I feel like it's more reactive budgeting and it fosters more of a scarcity mindset in your budget. But I know it does make it very easy to automatically categorize things. So if you use Mint or actually any budgeting software that allows you to export data, you can use that in here. So basically you just export the budget categories into a CSV file and then copy and paste them here. So I have some typical Mint categories here, and then I want to show you it just requires this extra step. You just need to go in and these. So this one I would add different rows to break those out for the paycheck categories. And you just kind of need to map those to this on the workbook. So it's just an extra step, but definitely something that isn't very difficult. I'm going to show a little bit more in depth in the next video about the process like on a monthly basis and how each of these is going to work in detail. But that's just a quick overview of tracking your cash flow there. If you're not currently tracking expenses at all, I recommend getting started with Tiller. I think it's $5 or $6 a month, but it saves a ton of time and it really is a cool service. I don't have a financial relationship with Tiller. I just have used them for a few years and I just recommend them to everybody. Once you've decided what you're going to use to track your cash flow, you're going to want to take a look at the budget categories. So the key to setting up budget categories is, first of all, to break out expenses that have tax consequences, and then also to focus on things that are useful to you personally. So if you're really spending a lot on eating out, for example, then you might want to break out some of those eating out expenses in a little bit more detail. For the tax categories, one example is separating deductible charitable contributions. That would be those to 503c organizations from the non-deductible donations, so things such as GoFundMe. This workbook, of course, has a pretty extensive list of budget categories. If you look at this tab, you'll see there's notes that show whether or not you can change this category and then how that's going to flow to the workbook. Let's look at a few of these categories. You'll see for the salaries and wages, the way it's broken out, you'll want to pull out your latest pay stub and compare those and adjust those to make sure all of those things are being reflected. I want to draw some attention specifically to these business income and rental income lines. As a CPA, I very highly recommend tracking business and rental activities totally separate from your personal finances. So my suggestion is to ensure you have separate bank accounts for these businesses and rentals, and then only include here the cash transferred from those accounts into your personal account. So there could be times that you're actually funding that business or funding that rental, and that could be what looks like negative income, and that's okay. If we continue to look through, you can see there's different savings items broken out by tax year, because of course it's a tax-focused workbook. A few other things you'll just want to go through is if you have a mortgage or rent, you might want to change that specifically to that. I just recommend going through each and every one of these items. Do not add or delete categories on this, only edit existing ones. This is really important. You can, however, hide categories you don't need. If you want to do this, you should use these below if you are using this transactions tab where you're actually entering them in. So if you're using basically YNAB, you won't need to do that because you're just kind of copy and pasting. But if you're using anything else, you can hide them here. You'll also need to hide them on the annual budget tab, on the annual cash flow tab, on the emergency fund tab, and then also on the retirement needs tab. Let's see here. Those are all the spots that have these individual line items listed. Once you have these budget categories finalized, the last step is to create your annual budget. I have an example here. I suggest starting with a typical month budget, so you might start with January and put in just kind of an example budget that would be typical for you, and then copy and paste that to all the remaining months, and then add and adjust for the extra items. So for income, this would be things like third paychecks if you're paid bi-weekly, maybe year-end dividends. For expenses, this could be things like annual insurance premiums, holiday expenses, travel. I do have a list of these items in my PDF instructions to kind of guide you on adding these things to your budget. One extra thing on this annual budget is the additional payroll information. So that's things that aren't going to affect the bottom line of your cash flow, but that impact the benefits that you're receiving from your employer. If you're starting in the middle of the year, you can just include actual data for all the beginning months so you have a full year of data. It's really important to have a full year of data here. And I just want to mention, a budget doesn't have to be like some super restrictive thing. If you find that it's not really accurate, even mid-year, any point in your budget, you can just adjust it. So having the annual budget sheet is one of the keys to making this entire workbook work. Realistically, you could use the workbook based on the budget without ever having to track your expenses, but I feel like there's a lot of value in tracking your expenses. So in addition, this budget's going to serve some additional purposes. For example, planning for retirement contributions. If you're not able to max them out each year, you can see how much room is in your budget for extra savings. It allows you to estimate your taxes up front and then throughout the year based on all of the current information that you have, and also to be able to modify your federal and state tax withholdings. And lastly, it just helps you to be a little bit more intentional about your finances, which is the entire goal here. That's a really brief overview, but if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. With just a little bit of this setup, your workbook will be ready to go.